Welcome to you all. Thank you very much for joining our webinar. This is more of an information sharing event, really. My name is Najla Rettberg. I work for the Research Data Alliance in Europe, and this is an event hosted by EOSC Future and RDA, and I'm happy to welcome our speaker, Michelle Williams, Product Manager from GEANT, who will be talking to us about the interoperability framework, and I will give you a bit of an introduction to the call itself and some context. I see some people are still in the waiting room, so you can let them in. Okay, so the purpose of this, I mean, they're not a huge amount of people, so it would be good to make it interactive, and we will give our presentations, and then after Michelle speaks about the framework, you please raise, please ask any questions, put them in the Slido as we go along, and we will address them afterwards, and of course do speak up and we can have a discussion at the end. Okay, so welcome to those who've just joined. I will give you a little bit of context and introduction to the calls that we're running in EOSC Future. I'll hand over to Michelle, who'll talk about the EOSC Interoperability Framework, and then I'll touch on how you can apply for the call and next steps. And then we can have a discussion as long as we like up until 12 o'clock. May not take that long. So I don't know who in this room knows about EOSC Future. I'm assuming quite a lot do, but there may be some of us who, some people in the room who don't know what EOSC Future is. Just to give you a bit of background, EOSC Future has the remit of setting up the EOSC, the European Open Science Cloud Platform, the portal. And the three sort of, it's a very technical project. And the three elements of that are setting up something called the EOSC-Core, which is the means really of enabling a federated set of services and resources to be searched across. So it's a vast range of services and research resources that are coming together in one place, and the EOSC-Core is the glue that brings that all together. So that enables things such as onboarding resources, authentication, monitoring, a help desk. So these are all the technical elements that the technical team in EOSC Future are building. Second comes something called the EOSC Exchange, and that is the way of bringing together all these data resources and data catalogs and research resources so that they can be searched across this large federated system from a very wide range of content providers. And the EOSC Exchange enables the onboarding of these resources and the searching across these resources for the users. Finally, in the EOSC platform, we have something called the EOSC Interoperability Framework, which is the purpose of this call that we're examining today. So this is really how you can search across resources, and it enables searching and making resources interoperable, so that in the semantic way, but also in other ways, so that you can have interoperability across services or even governance frameworks. And that is what Michelle will touch on. So it's an ambitious and very technical project, and there also will be some support and training in that about how to use the platform. Something called a key exploitable result, KER. These are the 8, I would say, tangible results we'll have by the end of the project. So I've already talked about the EOSC-Core, the EOSC Exchange, the science projects. In EOSC Future are a large number of very interesting science projects that largely come from the research infrastructures and the cluster projects, and they are sort of experimenting with how to integrate the EOSC-Core elements into their research workflows. So you can watch that space. There's interesting work going on there. The EOSC Observatory is about monitoring open science activities at member state level. The EOSC Interoperability Framework we're going to touch on. The Knowledge Hub is really a resources for training and data stewardship for understanding how to use the EOSC platform. Commercial services is bringing together, providing commercial services for data and data discovery, data analysis through the EOSC channels themselves, so to give an advantage to research institutions who would like to use commercial services. And finally, the EOSC Future community, we have a very large user base for EOSC that we've built up in EOSC Future. So that's a very quick run through. That's not the purpose of today, but just a very quick run through of what EOSC Future is doing. And you can get more information through the website, the EOSC Future website. Okay, so the purpose of the Research Data Alliance and EOSC Future Open Calls, give you a little bit of a background to the Research Data Alliance. It's been around for 10 years, and it is a very huge community and a grassroots community that is building these, enabling the bridges in order to share and discover and preserve data, research data. And it's working together at a global level because, of course, research data challenges are not just European, they're global, and they apply at a global level. So it's a very diverse community that are tackling some of these big issues, such as data discoverability and metadata challenges and fair data. And over the 10 years, there's nearly 60 outputs and specifications and very different diverse areas of these data challenges. We work in working groups, so people come together on one topical issue and start maybe with an interest group and then working towards a working group, and then the working group will have an output. So you can take a look at the website and see these outputs. So we have nearly 13,000 members from across the globe from nearly 150 countries. So it's a very unique and very active group of people working on these challenges. And our role, you can take a look, there's something for everybody on the RDA's website and different stakeholders. You can take a look at the disciplinary pages, or you could take a look about what RDA can offer you as a particular stakeholder. The reason we are in EOSC Future, we've one of the sort of the three areas we're working across. So I've just explained that the RDA comes from many different, comes from a diverse community and disciplinary communities, bringing that into EOSC Future. So we have standards and specifications in RDA. We want to see how they can be used in an open science and the EOSC Open Science Cloud environment within EOSC Future, and see how these can work together with the outputs of EOSC Future. And importantly, the third element is bringing the disciplinary element, so the disciplines on board as well. So that's the purpose of, that's some of the context of why we're running these calls, and that's what we expect to see in the applications, is these three elements. Again, so we're doing, it's about bringing the outputs of RDA and seeing how they can work through the EOSC portal within your domain, and how your domain, you can maybe search in EOSC portal and use and leverage some of the outputs of RDA. So we have a large program of the calls. This is one of the final calls we've got open because, of course, we need time for them to run and to have outputs by the end of EOSC Future, which ends, by the way, at the end of in September next year. So we have €1 million. We've created nearly 9 calls in different kinds of areas. We have an active group of ambassadors, for example, domain ambassadors who are working within their disciplines. We have larger cross-disciplinary grants, we have working groups, interest groups. So we have a whole different array of types of calls. We've funded nearly 30 projects so far. And what is important as well is that I said that in EOSC Future, we have the clusters and the science projects, but maybe they're not the disciplines that are, we also want to reach the disciplines that are not so well served by research infrastructures and data infrastructures. So we also want to reach out through these calls to those disciplines as well and get a large representation from different European countries. So we have 20 countries. So the calls are running at the moment. You can take a look at the types of calls that have been successful on the Meet the Grantee page on the EOSC portal, on the EOSC Grants portal. I'll give you the link to that. So we have a very diverse range of projects that we're funding. Okay, so on to the Interoperability Framework call. This is open until the 13th of December. You can apply again, I'll give you the link at the end. You can take a look at the specification of the call, and you can raise any questions with us after this webinar, of course, as well. We had discussions with the team that are managing the EOSC Interoperability Framework, and really we want to see how disciplines can interpret this call and contribute to the framework. So what of interest for us would be to have a use case, for example, in your domain, in your discipline, to see what does it actually mean to be part of this framework? What do I have to do with my metadata standard within my community so that we can put it into the framework? And really maybe a case study or a practical demonstration of what this means. What are the barriers? What's the realistic time frame? You know, something like that. Also, because RDA is global, it would be interesting to take a look at the framework in the context of any other global data commons interoperability framework as well, to make some connections there. So these are the sort of flavors of the applications we would expect. And possibly kind of demonstrations, so more in-depth demonstration of what it means to be interoperable of services and metadata. Even some crosswalk work would be interesting there. Deadline is the 13th. We have up to 2 grants, but this also could be, we could look favorably on smaller grants. It doesn't have to be 30,000. It could be smaller, more diverse grants. Okay, so ultimately, we want to leverage the RDA community that are working in this area. So one of the, as we evaluate, I'll touch on that in the end, is that we weight higher any applications that are from working groups within the RDA community, or interest groups, or people who are active in the RDA community. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Michelle. I'm going to stop sharing now. And as I said, Michelle Williams is the product manager at GEANT. She is going to give us an overview of the interoperability framework. And then you can pose any questions to her after she speaks. Michelle, I'll stop sharing. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Najla. Okay, give me a minute. Okay. So firstly, thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and talk to you today about the EOSC Interoperability Framework. Excuse me when I trip over the term, inevitably, midway through the presentation. Yeah, I'll just give you a little bit more context to the call. So why are we doing it? Well, I think everyone here would agree that interoperability as a concept is important, but I'd like to explain why we feel that interoperability framework is important for EOSC. EOSC is a growing federation of data and services, but it's vital that we facilitate interoperability if it's to add maximum value to users. We would like users to go beyond the discovery of a resource to the ability to access it or use it in a workflow with as little friction as we can manage collectively. Interoperability is more than just utilizing a specified standard. Using a particular standard that's supported by a service or a data set doesn't guarantee its interoperability with other components. Multiple interoperability guidelines exist already within communities, but how's a provider to know which standards to use in which cross-domain scenario? How's a provider to know how to interoperate with the EOSC-Core itself? And various other scenarios. In this case, we need to provide information to providers and users in a structured and trusted manner. This leads on to how we define the EOSC Interoperability Framework. Well, it's an activity in the EOSC Future project, as just described, but beyond that, it's a framework of guidelines and capabilities that would promote the utilization of community best practices within the EOSC. It's the governance that allows stakeholders to propose EOSC guidelines for inclusion in that framework and to manage its oversight. It's also the tools that enable interoperability, such as the EOSC Interoperability Registry. We talk about guidelines a lot, but in this case, we're using it in its broadest sense. That is a guideline in this context means a set of recommendations advising use of particular formats, metadata, protocols, APIs, standards, policies, and so on. Its objective is to help users and resource owners to understand what they need to export or what guidelines they should follow in order to expose data and services for the purposes of interoperability. The framework is for providers that operate resources, facilities, catalogues, and so on, and for users that would like to ensure that their products can interoperate with others. If a provider or a user is unsure of which standards to work towards for the purposes of interoperability, EOSC should be able to help them understand what's available and what best practice recommendations are out there It's a framework to which the scientific research community at large is encouraged to contribute. So interoperability for EOSC is both internal to the EOSC-Core, so that's making it operational and communicating between components, but also to support interoperability of the various elements of EOSC. It's also external to the EOSC-Core, so it's facilitating EOSC providers when they integrate resources with EOSC-Core services like monitoring or help desk, and it provides a foundation for composability of resources from the catalogue for EOSC Exchange and beyond that. To illustrate the point further, in this slide, these bubbles represent the various resources and their interfaces made available for EOSC by providers, communities and others. It's not currently possible for users to easily assess whether their research products or services are compatible with those already onboarded, or how they should prepare their data with a view to being compatible with another resource in another community. In its simplest form, interoperability is currently achieved by generally bilateral discussion, point-to-point technical integration, and that needs to be repeated with the next user of the service that comes along, and the next user and the next user, and so on. So whilst we might not be able to reduce the complexity of that landscape, we believe that we will be able to implement more interoperability by promoting the adoption of APIs, policies, common standards and interfaces, and by bringing to the surface the APIs, protocols and so on that are used, provided or needed by resources. We don't expect to create new standards, and we don't expect to become a standardization body, but instead we'll encourage adoption of existing community best practices. And as such, providers will be given the capability to indicate in the resource catalogue which interfaces or APIs or whatever guidelines and so on its services and research products support. And this could give way to reduce friction in interoperation, moving towards more composable workflows within the EOSC. We realise that there are many different types of interoperability, each with different challenges, and we're not attempting to solve everything. We're not actually saying that we will solve or that EOSC will solve everything, but narrowing our focus onto these specific areas will help us to deliver more value as time goes on. We're currently focusing on interoperability for the EOSC core services and on creating a facility for providers to signal compliance to community best practice within their resource descriptions. So what's meant by interoperation? Well, it's really complex, as I think everybody knows, and there's an ISO definition that's readily available, but practically, what does it actually mean to somebody who's preparing a product or a service? Well, it could mean conformance to a metadata schema. It could mean adherence to policies. It could just mean access and broad access. It could mean exposure or utilization of a particular format or API or endpoint or so on. And it could also then mean machine readable, executable workflows or configurations that cross infrastructural boundaries. And that's quite stretching, but theoretically, that's what it also means. But providing solutions to all of these is going to take a lot of time. So how can we achieve that? Well, simply pointing out to standards adhered to or software used in the creation of a service or a resource isn't really sufficient. Providers need to understand how to design and produce a resource that interoperates with other resources. Users will benefit from understanding whether it's possible to create a workflow using a resource or output which components or data are compatible with specified services or resources. Details of input, output formats, available endpoints, and so on, and really how they will go about producing results with interoperability in mind. So exposing information to providers and users will help them to understand more about necessary prerequisites or technical boundaries when utilizing a service or a resource in a wider context. So research is already interoperable. You know, we know that. It's understood that research infrastructures have been working on interoperability within and across infrastructures for years, and that institutions and facilities continue to work towards complex interoperability. But the EOSC Interoperability Framework aims to build upon this foundation with a goal to create a framework that encompasses the EOSC-Core and the interfaces necessary to accommodate links to community interoperability frameworks. It also means that EOSC Interoperability Framework can adopt and promote the uptake of existing community-endorsed interoperability standards and guidelines, with a view to facilitating and developing crossworks, maybe between resources, disciplines, and communities. We believe that interoperability guidelines will help us to describe how to interoperate with the EOSC-Core components, and more importantly, will help resource providers achieve interoperability across RIs, perhaps, either by describing their own interoperability guidelines or by working to the guidelines published by communities. So the framework itself is designed to comprise interoperability guidelines that cater both for the EOSC-Core and the EOSC Exchange. This means that the framework is designed to facilitate the process of allowing EOSC Exchange services to interoperate with the EOSC-Core. And by using a common service for key baseline functions, it can assist sustainability in the sense that it could optimize effort in core areas. It can also help to capture guidelines and technical capabilities for interoperation amongst EOSC Exchange services and resources, and would help providers to prepare services to interoperate with specific communities in mind. Communities will be encouraged to publish information describing how they interoperate as a community and how other communities can interoperate with them. So we talk about EOSC-Core and EOSC Exchange and so on. Well, this slide, I'm not going to sort of talk through it in detail, but it shows that EOSC-Core services in the oval at the bottom, in the wider context of the EOSC and its supporting activities, the EOSC Exchange comprising services and products provided by thematic and regional communities and the wider environment. And here we demonstrate various types of interoperability in the context of the EOSC. So this is where type A refers to integration of services with the EOSC-Core services. Type B represents interoperability between horizontal and value-added services. Type C represents interoperability between horizontal services, such as services provided by infrastructures and services provided by cluster or regional projects to their user communities. And type D describes interoperability between and among the research clusters. We are currently focusing on type A, but all of the types of interoperability as described here are in scope for the interoperability framework. So to recap on the work that we've done so far, the EOSC Future project initially described the proposed approach to be taken in a deliverable that was published in December last year. The approach is a continuance of the principles described in the EOSC Secretariat's Architecture Working Groups report, and it defined tangible steps to realise what's a fairly complex and ambitious framework. It's proposed that the EOSC formally recognises existing community interoperability guidelines and makes it possible for resources to signal their compliance to such guidelines. It discussed the differing types of interoperability between community and EOSC-Core services and proposed a governance framework for interoperability. So the task leads of EOSC Future Work Package 3 launched a widely publicised consultation in March earlier this year with a 90-minute webinar that offered more detail on the topic and gave the opportunity for participants to pose questions to the panel. The work was then adjusted to reflect the feedback received during that consultation, and an iterative process began. So additional to this background work concerning the framework itself, guidelines that facilitate interoperability with EOSC-Core services are being made available. And there's a number of working groups undertaking activities to explore and define specific topics that will also improve interoperability, such as the context of compute, metadata, and research publishing framework. So just a little bit more about this iterative approach. Well, so it's good practice with any complex development program to take an iterative approach. And by that, we mean that we will deliver functional increments. And the first of this would be capable of cataloging human readable guidelines that describe these inputs, outputs, endpoints, APIs, formats, dependencies, etc. And those documents can also link out to related guidelines and standards, where those related guidelines or standards may have been curated by other registries. So we aim to ensure that we don't duplicate the effort of existing community registries that have similar goals, but we want to make sure that the documents also point out to related guidelines that apply to other projects or infrastructures. This first iteration will support the tagging of resources that comply with specified guidelines. We'll then build further iterations to provide more complex functionality. So machine readable profiles describing how a resource complies with a guideline, or machine readable executable configuration templates where suggested configurations could be loaded to the EOSC in a machine readable format to be picked up by a third party. Or where machine composability could be achieved by orchestration services that would be included in an execution framework. There are different types of interoperability guideline, and we envisage we'll populate the EOSC Interoperability Framework with the first type initially we describe here, which is the concept of an interoperability guideline for the EOSC-Core. These are intended to describe specifications for the purposes of interoperating with EOSC-Core services. And the documentation is written by EOSC-Core service owners to provide context and technical instructions to providers that would like to integrate their services and or resources or be interoperable with one or more of the EOSC-Core services. So that it should also help resource providers to benefit from the functionalities that the EOSC-Core services offer. So this could be, I don't know, the examples might be onboarding to the EOSC Exchange using resource description framework defined by the EOSC profiles, or it could be connecting the EOSC monitoring service to a resource, or using the EOSC help desk, or making a facility available to the EOSC file transfer service. Second and third types of interoperability guideline are somewhat related, and it will be possible to recommend such a guideline for inclusion in the EOSC Interoperability Framework. These relate to where thematic services and resources interoperate with each other using EOSC interoperability guidelines, or where services and resources interoperate with each other across communities and infrastructures. I probably won't go over this in much detail. Najla did a really good job describing what we're looking for in this call, and I put together potentially some examples of interoperability. So that might be using a given method to advertise how a user can get data corresponding to a specified reference data set. It could then be possible to facilitate the machine actionable transfer of that data using the DOI to a specified analysis or data visualization facility. This could assist researchers in using data sets without needing to understand exactly where it is and to make offline arrangements prior to the data transfer or analysis proceedings. So again, as I said earlier, looking to reduce friction in the process of interoperation. Also potentially utilizing or building upon existing data exchange formats, maybe HDF5, to facilitate researchers in adopting or conforming metadata to terminology that facilitates or supports cross-domain crosswalks, maybe. Also, maybe where interoperable services and data can be shown to support multidisciplinary research collaboration, I don't know, perhaps in the example of modelling a swift emergency response. So I think those are sort of interesting use cases. So here's just a little bit of information about the EOSC-Core services. So there is information available already, and there are guidelines for reference. I've linked those in these slides. Teams wishing to interoperate with any of the core services, as described here and previously, they're welcome to come forward. Anyone that needs further help or assistance, you know, our team's on hand to help. EOSC monitoring and EOSC help desk guidelines, they're published in Zenodo. They provide more details about the enabling technologies and options for integration or for making services interoperable with them. And there's just a little example here. There's a couple of others that are probably worth talking about in the context of this call, one of which being the EOSC data transfer service. Again, information provided here, and there are details available online at a more granular level. So it's providing a generic data transfer service that can be used in EOSC to transfer large amounts of data to cloud storage by indicating the source and destination. EOSC research product harvesting may also be of relevance to the RDA, and all such guidelines rely on the OAI PMH protocol. Okay, so I've provided a little bit more information here, and I think we're going to be circulating these slides afterwards. But the general message is that we're keen to collaborate with communities that are experienced in interoperability and in solving interoperability problems. And particularly where the benefit can be applied across the EOSC, so we can learn from the experiences that you've had in your context. If you have community frameworks that should be promoted, then come forward as well, explaining what interoperability aspects your framework would support. And we'd love to see contributions from communities that would promote interdisciplinary interoperation. This can be based on a specified use case, as Najla said earlier. And if it's using EOSC services, then even better. In which case, please describe the intended interaction with the core service. So I think that's probably it from me. So I'll say thank you for listening. Yeah, any feedback's welcome. Questions and answers, please.
Thank you kindly, Michelle, and also thank you to Najla for your presentation. I would like to remind all of our participants that this event is being recorded and that and the slides included within will be available afterwards. Now, I have posted a number of times the link to slido.com where you may ask questions using your name or anonymously if you prefer, as well as upvote existing ones. We have, as of now, 4 questions available to be asked both to Michelle and to Najla. I will now attempt to share my screen. Yeah, that looks about right. Now, the first question would be where one can find the technical resources to interact with the current EOSC services, so APIs and metadata formats, for example.
Okay, so there is quite a lot of information available in the wiki, the EOSC Future public wiki, that is. Also, particularly the EOSC help desk and EOSC monitoring services, they are now documented within Zenodo, and the links are in the presentation. If there is anything specifically that's required, then people are welcome to reach out, and I can source the information for you.
All right, that will be the first question. The second one, a request for additional information, repeating who is eligible to apply or clarification. Do they have to be active in RDA from any time, or is this an open application?
Okay, so Andreas, I'll take that. Thank you for the question. I will give a couple of slides at the end about who is eligible. If it's in the context of RDA, then yes. The purpose of this calls are really to activate the RDA community and their expertise as much as possible. So one of the evaluating criteria is weighted heavily in applications that come from people who are active in RDA in general, that could be in interest groups, or leading, or being co-chair in any of the working groups, or who recognize that they have been present at some of the RDA events, or who could also make a case for setting up some kind of interest group in this area, if it's cross-disciplinary or even at a global level. So there must be some recognition there of RDA in the application, past history or possibly future. And eligibility I will get on to in a second in terms of who can apply in European institutions and so on.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Najla. The third question would be, again, clarification. Can you say more on the types of projects you could envisage, e.g. registering community guidelines, developing crosswalks between community standards, etc.? Do you already have an image of what that could look like?
Michelle, do you want to, or I mean, I'm happy, just, I would be happy to start. Yes, I mean, the interoperability framework is a fairly complex concept, I think, for some communities. And I think it would be, from the RDA perspective, would be very interesting to get the disciplinary input here of what does this actually mean to register community guidelines? What processes do you need to go to? What consensus do you need to reach within your community? And then what are the next steps to speak to the, to engage with the framework. And certainly, I mean, crosswalks takes a lot of time. It's quite an intensive experience, I would imagine, with metadata crosswalks, but certainly developing something along metadata standards and different types of metadata to make data interoperable would be of interest. So, and certainly for the disciplinary communities in RDA, for sure. That's from the RDA side. Michelle,
Now, we seem to have lost Michelle for a moment there.
She's, I think she's back in now. Michelle, are you there?
Let's hope so.
And if anyone else would like to say anything from anybody else on the EOSC Future team, then do, from the interoperability team, framework team in EOSC Future. Michelle, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me? Yeah. Zoom just completely crashed on me. I was literally taking myself off mute, and there it went.
Yeah.
So in terms of what these scenarios might look like was the question, yes? So I think it really depends on the context. We can sort of describe examples, and I think I gave a couple of examples towards the end of the deck. But I mean, what we're trying to do is invite contribution from people that have experience in solving interoperability problems. Now, whether or not that is cross-community interoperability, whether it's in respect to metadata, whether it's making a particular API available to allow the sort of the transitional transform of data from one place or one format to another. It really is for the scope of this call to define. And I think at the moment what we're doing is we're sort of focusing on more human readable documentation, providing human readable documentation that again facilitates interoperability. That's equally fine. So yeah, it really is just, please share your experiences with us and help us to sort of remove that friction across interoperation across communities.
All right, thank you, Michelle. The last question already that I have in Slido is more of a comment or an observation. Basically, the focus is, or at least seems to be, according to the person, on interoperability of or within the core services. How about the discovery and reuse of data on an interoperable cross-domain level via the EOSC portal? Is that something that is in progress, that is strived towards, or is this sort of a separate issue and or domain?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably not the best person to answer that particular question, I would say. However, we are working currently on discovery and reuse of data. We're working very closely with OpenAir, with the OpenAir graph. We're looking to establish how we can make the EOS more about data, or as much about data as it is about services. So that is what we're working towards. But it's not easy. It's taking time to achieve. But yes, that's exactly what we're trying to do.
Yes,
Right.
and I would just say, if there are any RDA groups here in the call that are already working on this at the domain level, that would be very interesting to leverage your work and take a look at the interoperability framework. Definitely, because I think the core services, that's one aspect, but I think that the developing and assisting interoperability in general would be advantageous to start looking at this. For the benefit of searching across different data types and different domains in the field. Any more questions? Keep them coming.
All right. We do still have a significant amount of time. Yes.
Mikiko Tadifuji, can I ask one question? Short. Are there any discussion about the evaluation with metrics of the interoperability through this project?
Evaluation with metrics, in what respect?
I read that the example of your interoperability and using the DOI to reference data set, etc. And do you plan to trace with how DOI is cited, or any alternative, more proactive methodology to be proposed?
That's a good question. I believe that work is ongoing around, I think it's an activity called accounting, which I think the
accounting.
Right. Yeah, it can be somewhat
Is that
misleading.
part of your future?
EOS Future has accounting, usage, accounting and metrics and so on in scope of its delivery.
Okay, thank you.
So further information, if there is something specific that you needed to understand, then absolutely we can arrange for discussions about that.
Thank you very much.
Yes, and as you have done, Mikiko, please feel free to take the floor. We still have a bit of time left in the workshop. So if there are any further questions, either through Slido or here, do not hesitate.
I will just go over the evaluation criteria with you and a couple of slides about how to apply. If that's okay, Andreas, I'll share my screen. Here we go. Hang on a second, everybody, bear with me. Okay, so right, so if you would like to apply, to say the obvious, but that's the URL there. It's called the EOSC Future Funding Platform. That's where all the RDA calls are listed. You can see the previous ones that are closed now, and there's only one call open. So that's where you'll find it. Just to iterate, you cannot be part of the EOSC Future Consortium or an LTE, which means a linked third, LTP, I'm sorry, not LTE, linked third party. EOSC Future is a very large consortium. If you're unsure in any capacity, please email us at the email underneath there. Please, we can answer that and we can find out, because it's got so many different partners with linked third parties and cooperations going on. You cannot in any way, unfortunately, be linked to the EOSC Future Consortium. You cannot be eligible. You have to be based in Europe. Your tax address and your address has to be in Europe in order to receive the funding. You can be an organization, an institution, or even an SME. That's no problem. As we said previously, you need to have an affiliation to RDA or prove in your application that could be a potential affiliation or activity coming up within the Research Data Alliance, and use of the working groups and so on. If you've already applied for a call and have a call running for the RDA open calls, you can only receive a maximum of 60,000 per individual or organization. So just in case you already have some funding from this particular program. The call will close middle of December, and we hope to have the results in early January to give to you. 3 evaluators evaluate each proposal. We have a large pool of evaluators that we call on with different expertise, and so we reach consensus that way. So it's not us that evaluate them. It's a very transparent, independent process. The criteria is divided into 3 areas: excellent, impact, and implementation. Of this, the weighting is split. The excellent is split into 2. That's the statement and vision about EOSC, knowledge there, but also RDA, that's important, it's 15% there. The impact also comes into the technical capacity and how the work may carry on beyond the proposal. That's also important to put that into the proposal. And then, how are you planning to carry out the work and the resources and so on. So if the grant is not, it may not be so big, so you may not have full personnel on this. It may be work you're doing on top of your other job, depending on the grant you apply for, but the methodology has to be spelled out. And we have a grants committee as well in EOSC Future that takes a second look at the results and signs off on them. And they are comprised of many different people, work packages in the project itself. So yes, please do get in touch with us after this with that email address, and you'll find that on the EOSC Grants portal address as well. Okay, so that's all I have to say from my side. I don't know if there's any more questions, Andreas, from anybody.
Well, so far so good, unless we have questions coming here from the floor.
Do feel free to speak up, anybody, and ask if anything's not clear, or put into the, if this is not, if there's something you would like to apply for, or if anything is not clear in the text, we'd be happy to know about that as well. And look forward to your applications, and do email us if there's any aspect you'd like to discuss with the team, Michelle and her team, or the RDA team as well. Anything else, Andreas, coming in?
So far so good. So as a reminder, you may use slido.com with the hashtag interoperability and passcode 1xi70x in order to log in to ask or upload existing questions.
This has been recorded, and we will put this next to the app on the grants portal as well as
Right.
results.
All right, we have 2 new questions coming in. One from Giulia Conforto, being, when you are talking about interoperability or type A, do you also mean being able to use data and databases collected on a platform, or only through web services and automated services?
I don't think either is exclusive. I think if there is a scenario that could be described where it would enable the use of data, or the use of data via a web service, as you sort of point out, I think that either would be interesting use cases. Is there a particular reason why you would ask or specify either?
Julia, you may feel free to answer. Okay.
So what would that reason be?
Okay. Apparently, yes, there is a specific reason, but that is all I have so far. We have confirmation, in case you're missing the conversation in the chat, that UK companies are still eligible, as this is still a Horizon 2020 project. And the answer from Julia being, she's thinking of the project Maps, which gathers access to a number of open access data sets on a visualization tool.
Yes, I'm not familiar with that project, but I mean, if the context or the core aspects of a potential proposal might be how to make it interoperable and to remove that friction from the process, I think it would be interesting to hear the case study.
Yeah. From my understanding, Maps, however, does not provide them through web services, but only via a user interface, is what I'm reading here. So.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I see the point that you make, Julia, here. Perhaps it would be something where if you have something in mind, if you have an idea, I see no reason why we wouldn't, take an offline conversation, and we can actually sort of bring in some additional people to that conversation to help sort of bring to life that idea.
Okay. 2 more Slido quick questions, a bit more on the pragmatic sides. The first being where to find the LTPs.
Yeah, the best is to email. Ask your organization, but some organizations are so vast, it's sometimes quite hard to find this out. If you're unsure, send us an email to the email address we provided, and we will double check. We have to go to the consortium coordination, and they check, because that's the safest way. Because I don't know off the top of my head, and it's not written down completely in the consortium agreement, all of them. So,
and a last one on Slido that I have here. How do you become an RDA member?
So you can join as an individual. We have organizational membership as well, but anyone can join. You go onto the website and you can register, and then you will be given the green light, and you can get involved in any of the groups and come to the plenaries next March. There's a plenary in Gothenburg in Sweden, 10-year anniversary. So you can get involved online and in person, and you take a look at the groups and see where your interests lie, and then you can get active with the community. Thank you, class, for the links.
Anything else from the floor or from Slido?
Thank you very much for attending, everybody. I hope that was useful. I hope that it's given you some food for thought and to help any potential proposals, and do get in touch after with Michelle or myself if there are any more questions. Thanks for the opportunity, for letting us talk. Thank you, Arctic, Andreas and Alex.
My pleasure. As a reminder, this workshop, the contents of the presentation as well, will be made available as soon as possible. We will reach out to you on that. Thank you for taking time in your workday. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be, and all the very best.